that is right, class. We are back finally for our top 40 GAC teams. And I'm not entirely sure what is going on with power creep. I can't tell if it's getting better or if it's getting worse. All I know is that right now, at the very top, there are a lot of teams either competing with GLs or needing GLs to beat them. So before we jump into said top of the list, I do want to put out one housekeeping item, and that is the last time we did this video, we specifically cut out all Conquest characters in an effort to cater towards smaller rosters. We will be doing that periodically. We'll probably be doing every other, one with Conquest characters, one without. That'll really serve two purposes. One, it'll allow a wider variety of rosters to get better information, and on top of that, it'll make the videos a lot less repetitive because we won't just be adding in the one or two teams. It'll actually be quite a bit of a jump. Speaking of a bit of a jump, this very top, what we call our S tier, used to only have like 2 or 3 teams of Starkiller and Inquisitors and Malgus. It is not that way anymore. We now have 9 teams in our top S tier. For those of you who are unfamiliar with how this works, is whatever teams are in this very top area are the ones that compete with Galactic Legends on a regular basis, either by having a very high win percentage against one or several of them, or when they're put on defense. This would kind of be where Treya fits in. It actually typically requires a Galactic Legend to beat her. In the case of Treya, she typically needs SLKRC to come in solo or maybe duo the team. But at any rate, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I don't know if this means power creep is getting better because we're not really getting a new tier. We're getting the highest tier just added to a ton. Or I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's getting better or worse. You let me know. But for the new additions we have, first off, are the Gungans. And I am probably super biased here because I love them. But I'll have you know, even without their wonderful datacrons they've had for the last 4 months, I dug into the data on them, and these guys are a pain in the butt. While they do have the capability to beat a few Galactic Legends on offense, the real secret is what they are doing on defense. And we kind of showcased this a little bit in our recent How to Omicron and Use Jar Jar Binks video. Kind of a plug for that, I guess. But at any rate, they really aren't being consistently beat by all the Galactic Legends. In fact, it's a very small few, meaning that they are one of the top teams because we don't really even see a budget counter right now for them. Now, granted, they are a very new team and a budget counter will likely come out in 1, 2, or 3 months, but at this time it is yet to be seen, and they really do deserve a place at this top area. Bo-Katan, really not a lot of reason for her not to be here. She has Lord Vader completely nailed down. He can beat her out in some cases, but it really typically requires a very expensive team with like Malicos as well as a very good Datacron. We have Queen Amidala up next, and don't ask me why, but for whatever reason, when I went to go put this list together, in my head, without the Palcron, she wasn't S tier. She was going to fall in the A tier, which is still a good team, but not quite the challenging Galactic Legends level team. But I dug into the data just like I did with Gungans, and holy crap, this team is a pain on defense. Even if you completely remove the Palcron and all like the Galactic Republic shenanigans, the 2 main counters to beat Queen Amidala on defense are Bane, which that's expensive, or Gas, who is essentially on gear with the amount of boost he was getting from the current Datacron set, both between like the 75% health protection and the damage reduction overall. And then obviously he has great synergy against the team because they have a ton of buffs, and he really likes it when his enemy team gets buffed. But at any rate, the only really non-Galactic Legend teams that were beating this were already high caliber teams like Bane or Gas on steroids. So it seems to me that they really would fit the definition, just like the rest of the squads that are in here. Starkiller, I really don't have to expand on this. We're actually in a Datacron season right now where he's able to beat Rey to great success, so that's very cool for him, especially with the Attackercron. Inquisitors, amazing with or without the Omicron. You know, they're just great. Treya, again, overall very versatile team on offense when you're trying to take down a lot of stuff. Not exactly killing the highest level of teams out there, but at the same time on defense, I mean, I can't remember the last time someone didn't have to either throw a specific Datacron or C at it, and that kind of takes the cake because at that point it serves a very similar purpose as Malgus does on defense. Rule of 2, Bane. You guys know why he's here. He's amazing. He's arguably the single best character in GAC right now, and that might even be with including Galactic Legends. It's ridiculous how good he is, and especially on a budget how good he is. I guess we just explained him. Anyways, next up is going to be Seer Malicos. You can combine this with a Starkiller team when they don't have advantageous boosts going on, but when they don't, I mean, it's an amazing team. I've been using it to kill the Inquisitor team that we saw above, even when they're buffed out of their mind with a Datacron as well, so definitely deserve a spot here. And then Malgus again for the overall defensive viability. Cal Kestis has really taken a shot at that, and that's great for Cal, but if Cal gets pulled away into something else, like to help JML beat Lord Vader because you don't have Bo, then the situation becomes much more complicated, and Malgus still isn't the easiest team out there to beat. So this is our very top of the line teams. This is kind of what everyone's end goal more or less in mind should be. Obviously not to get all 9 of them at the same time, but to be working at one of them at all times probably would make sense unless you're going for a Galactic Legend that's obviously bigger. Now next up is going to be the A tier. These are slightly lesser than the S tier, but at the same time, you need them. You have to set, what is it, like 22 teams in 5v5, even more than that in 3v3, or not set, but use that many teams. So you can't just use the top 9 that are in here. You have to use all these. So all these teams are fantastic, whether it again be for offensive or defensive uses. They're able to challenge, in a lot of ways, a lot of the teams that are in this higher tier, or even in some really small cases, even challenge Galactic Legends in some really niche scenarios. But we'll get into that. So first up is actually going to be Trench. And Trench is going to hold most of his viability on defense, and huge caveat, huge asterisk here, he has to be using this exact team. Once you start subbing Watt out to use him with C and put in GBA, the team overall falls drastically. But you'd actually be surprised, this is even without the right Datacrons, which I realize there have been a lot of right now, but even without those, they have a 50% hold rate versus Bad Batch and Imperial Troopers, which in my mind were always the two more budget counters against this. And pretty much what's happening right now is it's only being countered by squads that are already in this tier, like General Skywalker, or ones that are above it, like Starkiller. So it makes a lot of sense for it to be here purely based off its defensive viability. It can do some fun things on offense. I feel like that's more of a TW space because of the boost that Trench gets there. Next up is going to be Phoenix. Again, one of the things that characterizes the squads that go into the A tier is that they have a chance to beat squads in the S tier. Inquisitors are right here. I realize that counter is really rough right now, not impossible, but rough with the current Reva Datacron, but at any rate, Phoenix more or less have Reva's number as long as there isn't an outside boost like that. Next up is going to be the Maul team supporting with an entire Dark Side, Mandalorian, and Empire cast here. This team can just do a ton of damage ever since ISC got his rework. And you notice we have Magma Trooper in here, and Magma Trooper probably isn't the best overall fifth. You probably actually want to be using Jango if I'm honest. But if we're wanting to put Jango at the Trench team and still make 40 teams, Magma Trooper can actually do some disgusting things that most people aren't aware of. One of the things that Maul really wants at the beginning of the battle, if there isn't a Kenobi on the other side, he wants to be able to use his AoE as soon as possible. That way Candace will go, be able to use a special, trigger Maul's Frenzy, and then Maul can have 5 back-to-back hits with everyone assisting, and then Gar and ISC doing a ton of true damage. Well, where Magma Trooper fits into that is the fact that he will get a ton of turn meter the second he starts resisting a lot of debuffs. And there are actually some high caliber teams out there that have resistible debuffs on AoEs, like JML, like Leia. And the second that he comes in and resists one of those, and he can go first, he can actually trigger the first round of Maul's Frenzy by using his Thermal Imploder. Maul will go, trigger Candace, Candace triggers Maul, and all of a sudden Maul gets to delete 1, 2, or even 3 units on the enemy team. So still definitely a force to be reckoned with, just a little bit more nuanced if we're wanting to make a higher amount of teams, which you don't necessarily have to do, but at any rate, it's very good. Next up is going to be the Jedi team, and essentially if you don't have JML, this is probably the Jedi team that you would be making, or maybe you wouldn't even have this, but if we're cutting out Galactic Legends entirely, which is how these videos work, this is kind of the team you end up with, and this is a very solid team. You can beat a lot of the higher end stuff with it, including JMK in a very nuanced way where you play it just right to get Cal Kestis to annihilate very quickly, getting out Cad, ignoring taunt, using the savior, timing the 5-turn stun to hit right. It can be used to do that. Next up is General Skywalker. We've already talked about him beating several of the higher caliber teams, which is really why he's here. Outshine Sod against Malgus, outshine Sod against Padme, maybe even higher than that actually later on. General Grievous. So this is another team to me that is similar to Queen Amidala and maybe even Gungans, where it's very new, and I think in my head, this speaking for myself, I have a lot of its viability trapped behind the stop datacron that we had not too long ago. But once I started digging into the data, what this team was doing defensively, even when that entire set of like level 6 and level 9 that were really busted for General Grievous were not present, this team was still holding a lot against counters that you think would be working, including but not limited to Wampa and Bad Batch, which again were supposed to be the budget counters for General Grievous as a whole. So maybe that will prove differently over time, especially Wampa has his own datacron right now, so I'm guessing Wampa probably, or General Grievous probably doesn't have a standard chance of surviving on defense at this point. But long term, how all these teams end up falling, I think this is going to be in a better position than we realize, and not just because they don't currently have a datacron, but just because the team is that good. Next up is going to be the Finn Zori stupid team. Again, this is like Darth Bane. You know why this team is here. If you've ever faced it, it's ruined your day, because the second you preload it, it kills literally everything. We've been there. You've seen it. It's been great. Next up is going to be Afra. She's here because she has an outside shot against Jabba, and she is actually a pretty common counter to some of the other teams here. Not limited, but including our good friends Finn Zori right above it, which is pretty much my go-to counter at this point. And then Imperial Remnant. Imperial Remnant is in a really weird spot right now because they're transitioning, but they're not. We currently have the 2 zombie troopers here, and while they're going to go to Enoch, that's been pretty hard confirmed, Enoch's not here yet. And if we're wanting to use as many Empire characters as possible in the best way as possible, you kind of want to use them with Remnant because they're actually doing really good things there at this moment. So we'll put them there, but you recognize that this is a temporary home. This is not where they're going to be forever. So S tier, obviously amazing at the Galactic Legend level or better-ish. I don't know. A tier, challenging S tier, and also having a little bit of a shot against those Galactic Legends every now and then. B tier is where things start to get a little bit more nuanced. None of these teams are bad. However, they have specific interactions that really only let them be effective in the very end game against a handful of teams rather than being world beaters. And first up is actually going to be Padme. And this is a team that most people don't have, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, purely because it requires having Commander Sokotano without having JMK. If you are one of those oddballs that fits into this category, fret not. It's actually a really good Gas and General Grievous counter. It even will stop in there doing nasty things. And even if you're wanting to punch up way higher than that, you can actually sub out Shock here for 3PO and actually make a JMK counter of it. It's very nuanced. I would recommend looking up a video on modding and turn order before you try it for your first time, but that counter is on the table if you dial in everything correctly. Next up is going to be Saw, currently leading the best Rebel fighters out there. This team will probably improve further once Luthen does come into the game, or rather is unlocked by everyone in the game. Night Sisters. Night Sisters are a great example of what I was talking about before, where they're not necessarily world beaters, but gosh, they beat a few things out there just really well. One of the hottest things that is being talked about right now, and hopefully the win rates will improve on it ever since Zareth made a video on it, but that is taking out Jabba, and it's really revolves around getting Marin's Omicron to work so that she can pretty much loop 100% turn meter by having her allied Night Sisters die and revive. I won't go into great detail on that because there's a reason Zareth made a whole video on it, but they do have the potential to beat some really strong stuff out there. Tuskens are another great example. They are specifically built to beat turn meter teams. If the enemy team isn't a turn meter team, they kind of just get ripped apart immediately. They're not super versatile. They're not world beaters. They are good in their proper context. Same thing can be said about Bad Batch. Bad Batch are actually having a really hard time right now, given the fact that Trench and General Grievous both just kind of got upgraded. But I mean, it wouldn't shock me that much if we got Crosshair in maybe the next 6 months or something like that, and just kind of put them back on top just to keep the hamster wheel going. Wampa, love him. He's his own team. Yes, he doesn't beat as many things as he used to just because the board has gotten a lot stronger, but at the same time, it's a ton of value. Qui-Gon Jinn, personal favorite team. Absolutely love it. It is pretty locked into some specific mechanics like we talked about with some of these other teams. If you don't get the explosive damage from Jedi Anakin, or if it wasn't enough to kill who you need to kill, the team pretty much goes down entirely. Maybe not bad for a 2-shot, but at the same time, we would prefer to one-shot things. Iden, again, classic example. She's really good at beating teams that attack on a turn, more specifically Rebel teams that do it as well. So if your opponent put down a CLS and or a Mon Mothma team, it's Iden City. She'll just completely go ham. Even with a slightly lesser team like she's working with here, she can do just fine. All right, next up is going to be our friend Adrad. Again, very similar thing. If there's an Empire enemy team, he probably beats it unless it has Starkiller or Lord Vader in it. We have our Bounty Hunters next. You can get pretty much an instant contract with this very specific team of 5 using Aura. We could probably include Zaman here in place of Fennec if you want the extra speed as well. But there are different options and reasons to have Fennec in here with her armor shred to do some fun things if Mando's Annihilate can't actually knock them out, or if you're just wanting to get contract that much faster. We have Dash. He's a fun team to put on defense. Hondo Onaka really does kind of mess with things because he will go first. He will captive someone that you probably don't want to be, and it'll mess up counters like Bounty Hunters specifically, or Imperial Troopers or some other team that can go out in front. Imperial Troopers, again, very locked into 1 or 2 mechanics. They need to go first, they need to be able to get their buffs, and they need to get kills to be able to keep things going. If they can do that, they're off pretty well. And last, but certainly not least, is going to be CLS. And I probably shouldn't say it, but you guys would notice anyways. CLS actually got demoted. CLS was typically an A-level squad, but the more that I looked about how stronger the teams have gone, I just kept looking over this. I'm like, CLS doesn't really beat any of this without a lot of help. He doesn't beat Gungans. He doesn't beat Bo Mandalore. He really, I know a lot of people like he does. I've gone through the stats on it. He's not a great counter to Starkiller. He can do it in some outside situations, but overall just really struggles to beat anything in this top category. And even from this category, he's only a great counter against maybe 2 or 3 of them, which would perfectly describe the B tier because you're specifically looking for some of these teams to be on there. Like General Skywalker, like the Revan team he actually probably does well against, like Afra. He can take those out to great effect, but at the same time, that's kind of what describes a B tier team, is that they can punch up against select A tier teams. So now moving finally to the C tier. D tier, by the way, has been retired. The teams have just gotten that much better that if we dip below that, we go beyond 40, and I kind of don't want to do that for video length, and you just kind of start making weird teams at that point. First up, speaking of weird teams, is going to be what is essentially the leftover Jedi team. We should probably actually be cutting Barriss out of here at this point because we are now using her, actually, and Ayla. Ooh, this is going to get really weird really fast. I guess we're going to be putting in our good friends Kit Fisto and Luminara because she has an Omicron. This is the leftover Jedi team you get after you make all of your really good Qui-Gon Jinn, your Jedi Knight Revan, even your Queen Amidala, who is using a pretty much entirely Jedi team. That's what you're left with. Next up is going to be Sortie. Not necessarily a bad team, but what is going to define the C tier the most different from the other ones is these are really just teams you use to transition. Whenever you're going after a Galactic Legend or another legendary farm, they're going to be characters that you're forced to gear up, and you can put them into teams and you can make them work for a time, but the ultimate goal should be to move away. Move to some of the characters or teams that are more specialized for certain counters or that are just better in general. I realize, though, that's going to take time. Nobody's going to have all 9 of these teams farmed up day 1, month 1, even year 1, even years. It's going to take to be able to get these. So we have to be realistic. We have to start using some of these other teams that we got because we wanted to get Wat Timbor, that we got because we wanted to get Leviathan, that we got because we wanted to get Jedi Knight Revan. There's a lot of requirements in this area that help bolster our roster in a way where we don't overinvest, but we can still get some worth out of them. Sana's another great example of that. She's needed, or her entire team is pretty much needed for Jedi Knight Luke in one way or the other, and then she herself is needed for Afra. Huck's team, you're going to build this up once you go for SLKR. We've got our good friend Mon Mothma, and pretty much her, Cardoon, and Kyle Katarn are all requirements one way or the other. Pal and Hot Rebel Scout aren't, but they are the ideal for the team. Thermals galore, this is pretty much just what you get before you unlock Jabba, so again, transition into Jabba, this is the team that you would probably want to use before. Boba Fett lead is actually kind of sneaky, and he allows the Hutt Cartel to do a lot of the things they want to do. Despite the fact that he doesn't have any Hutt Cartel specific things in his leadership, a lot of the other members of the team want a Hutt Cartel ally in the leader slot to do what they want to do. And then we have Ewoks and Wookiees to finish things out. And again, I realize these squads can do better things than C tier once you really put a lot of investment into them, but for most players, you're better off putting investments into higher teams like this so that Night Sisters or CLS or whoever actually can go and tackle higher things up like Jabba than you are investing in these lower teams. So that is going to be it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think. Again, we will be back with the non-conquest variation of this video in probably 2 or 3 months from now. But until next time, thanks for watching and stay awesome.